Hey, what's up, viewer? Welcome back. This is what I'm going to call Day 8, Hour 2. I'm a little late on getting some Day 8 videos in, but I'm just going to put the next couple in as Day 8 since I had a lackluster performance with one video on Day 8. Alright, so this is the Nebulous Live Creation Series. I'm feeling a little better today. Yesterday, it definitely was kind of out of energy. Kind of only squeaked in one video. I'm going to give it a shot though, because I always want to get more than 1 hour done a day. That's something that I gotta do for the sake of making progress on this game. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. Excuse me. Sorry about that. For some reason, the copy paste is being a little strange. Not used to acting like that. Alright, I've got to come up with a way to not quite reduce the economy gain per tick here, but instead make the economy tick reduced by the total parallel capacity in play. Because in this instance we are investing in both, but it's only supposed to reduce the economy by the parallel capacity. So even if there's 4 things in the queue, if it can only do 1 per tick, then it should only be reduced by 1, not reduced by multiple numbers. So the idea is to be reducing the economy gain per tick by essentially the parallel value. So instead of tweaking this every time I add or remove a button assignment or an investment assignment, iterate player economy needs to more or less say if there's anything in the queue, the investment parallel value needs to run multiple times, even if it grabs the same investment. Invest in that value and adjust some values for other things as well. So that's if there's an active investment, therefore I'll think a little bit on how to do this part. I get to save a group of or like the total value. It's basically this, the infrastructure times economy research minus investment parallel value. And then investment parallel value, but some other things as well later, like infrastructure parallel value. Or ship build parallel value, something like that. Where other systems can get in on the deficit. So you can actually have multiple sets running at the same time. So you can have like ships and research and infrastructure all going at the same time, but they, by their natures, are separated. And that has to add up to how much the economy gets reduced by every tick. So it means this code is usable almost as a global even if there's only one thing in the queue, the total economy gain will still run the investment parallel value times, number of times. So it shouldn't have to run the maybe run it out here. Or I can more or less it has to be within the bounds of the queue, which is this. So maybe I need to run it down here. Before the economy iterates itself. I can do that anytime actually, let me check. Yeah, I do that anytime. Oh, wait, hold on, no. If this is the queue, then perhaps I need to do it inside of here. This will effectively, oh, it didn't round it. It doesn't have to though. Oh, it does round it. So I might as well round it down. Might as well round it down here as well. All right, and this should fix that issue, is the goal. The goal is that I can queue up multiple investments without decreasing the deficit by multiple times. Okay, good, so it's working. So they're investing one at a time, but the deficit is not reduced by more than one, which is the ideal goal. It's by the same note, if I select the planet, let's say I invest in scan range and scan frequency, it should, once again, not decrease it, but I should still see parallel growth in the values, which I am seeing. So the player could do something like this feasibly and like just globally buff their scanning power pretty hard, and it wouldn't even hit the deficit because there isn't a parallel capacity, which was something that investment values was going to provide to the player. They would have a tech option to invest, and when they invest in that, it actually increases their parallel capacity. So if they bumped it up to 2, it would run 2 at a time, and if they bumped up to 4, it would run all 4 every time. And this would go down to like 1. And if they went even further, what it would do is it would start essentially running certain values multiple times. And you can effectively use it to spend more economy on buffing your values. It increases the amount of economical power you can apply to your research or your infrastructure, is the idea. It would be the same thing for, like, basically there would be a research one and possibly an infrastructure one and a ship one, or like the ship, kind of like build capacity or something like that. So I'm not sure if that would be there, but it could be used to make more ships at once, sort of, or apply more build power to ships or something on a global, at some kind of global level. Alright, so oh, so that's not correct. So it went back to its old ways of not removing the value it added. And I suppose that is, and now I understand why that is, basically. Because in the event I remove the last element, there's nothing in the queue to run this code, so it doesn't reset once, it doesn't reset on the last try. Which I suppose is why the idea was to go like this, but this is just not efficient because if I run this every single tick, then there's instances where it will be running the same code over and over. It doesn't need to. It only needs to like run off of an updated variable or something. But effectively I have to run this one more time for whenever the last investment is removed. Otherwise it will not run this block and it won't update, the very last one won't update the value. The other thing is every tick it will reduce investment parallel value from total economy gain. So if I run it outside of this block, it will I guess well, no, it doesn't matter because it's not using the tick in the calculation. So the easy thing, I'm pretty sure it's just going to be to go like this. I guess I also could just run it in an else block. And just in case there is nothing else in the queue, run this once, and then it won't run it every time. So I guess that's gonna work. And for some reason I started at 4. So that's not correct. So that's running by default. Alright, so maybe my idea was not correct. Because now it's running anytime it's 0. Every tick. There's gotta be a conditional that I can use here. Okay, so I had the idea to run it as, change this to something called total parallel value. And that would be the sum of all parallel instances. As opposed to just the investment ones. Which is basically what investment parallel value is supposed to mean. It's the total of all investment parallel values. Yes, this is very bizarre because I can set the economy per tick max, but then it's got to remove investment parallel value unless the investment parallel Q is greater than 0. But I already did a greater than 0 check up here, so if current investing Q is greater than 0, it's going to run this, and this is going to be accurate because it's making investments of, I suppose you could argue, any sort. However, down here, the idea is that the player has absolutely 0 investments. Meaning that absolutely 0 investments, and the only thing this is doing is calculating the economy maximum and applying that to the tick value. And one other thing I considered is that the UI, I have to do some UI code, but let me see, I guess I'll have to take a look at whether or not I need to. Since give this another shot, it should start at 5 and not decrease by 1 by default. And it should still decrease the deficit by 1 and do everything it's supposed to here. It looks like the data is correct. It's all looking correct. And if I implore it to do parallel, it should not decrease the deficit. And it's still functioning properly. And I guess we might as well just do the whole thing here. So if I invest either of these, it sticks. And the parallel process is still in effect. And then if I clear them one at a time, it does not screw up the deficit until I take out the last one. Alright, so that's situated. Which is basically going to require a text value here for like parallel research or something. But I could just make it a singular value that is simply parallel investment, and then it could just buff the investment value. However, the balance starts to get really strange there because it's cheap to parallelize pretty hard. So it's sort of like a why not just do parallel? Because if you do an econ parallel build, you're practically just infinitely increasing your econ and your capacity at the same time. there's eventually going to be some weird cases where I have to deal with bankrupt situations where the player can't afford the next tick. And my idea is to do a negative, like allow them to go negative. However, the more negative they are, the less their economy contributes to getting out of the negative, more or less. So the more negative it is, the less their currency is worth, more or less, is arguably a way to say it. So it forces them to like severely divert their economy back up. The weird thing with that though is that like if they do some humongous scan, that'll throw them into like that can throw them way down negative. So my idea is to like perhaps add a tech value for like a debt value, and you can invest into going into debt. And that would give the player a default cushion of debt, basically. But like I said, the more debt you have, the more money you need to get out of it, is essentially the idea. And that would be kind of interesting for the player to be able to invest in some debt strategies. Alright, so that's all working except for the fact that these need to buff these scanning values, which means I'm going to have to convert these to floating points, I'm pretty sure. Because, man, but if they're floats, they don't. If I don't turn them into floats, the player will be able to make this effect, but get no visual feedback. If they see the percentage, they understand that that raw percentage bonus is basically coming from the scan frequency or from the research values. They understand that there is a piece of that that's buffed. So actually, perhaps instead what I could do is leave these as integers, but then turn this into a float. And that way if the scan range is like 3, but they can get up to like 3.5 or something, they understand that's coming from this. And I guess this could be the same thing on a ship. Maybe a ship is engineered with like 5 range, but then because of the bonus it goes up to like 5.5 or something like that. If they actually could get this up to 10% or something. And then I would only have to change these 2 elements, more or less. And I would have to mess with these elements, and the base infrastructure would not be interfered with. And then the economy, maybe the economy is a base of 10, but they have the deficit readout to see the feedback of this. So that still makes sense. Alright, so I'm going to have to dive in here and figure this out. I have active scanning radius max, active scanning frequency max, and these actually are already in the code as part of the scanning active scanning elements. And we're considering the active scanning radius max. Which I don't even see in here. It looks like I'm not even using them. So that leads me to wonder if I'm changing them elsewhere. So it's almost like I have to I'm gonna have to update these labels. In the event the tech changes, or in the event the infrastructure changes. Which is why I would assume that these would be in here, but they are not. So now I'm considering that it's the infrastructure element that in fact okay, perhaps not. I guess that means it's got to be inside of the economy value. Here's some scanning stuff. So if it invests and there's an active selection, and it might have iterated even, and simply checking the value to see if it's changed. If it has changed, it is increasing the value here. Okay, so here, yes. Here's the scanning radius. Okay, so the high value of the slider is this times player data, if I can type it, of course. Player data scanning range research. Almost. This actually makes the number very small. So in fact what we want to do is add we essentially want to add it to itself times itself. Or we want to add it to itself times the percentage. If I'm not mistaken. And that will essentially give like 5 plus like 5% of 5, which is, you know, that would be like 5.025. But that would be applying the research value. And it doesn't actually change the infrastructure value, but it doesn't matter because it's defined locally anyway. And it's the same thing here, it's just okay, so this might it's going to change it a little bit here. I'm going to have to do the thing where I round it or whatever. So let's see if we can remember how to do this. So math f dot round. We are rounding to like active scanning range dot high value. Times the 1000 float. Which moves the decimal place over 3, chops the end off, and then we divide it by 1000 float to move the decimal places back over. And then this entire thing needs to be turned into a string for the text value. And that puts 3 decimal places. So let's put 2 in. We'll squeeze it a little differently. So real quick, let's see if this works. So if this works, this number should increase functionally, not just visually. So the slider. So let's take a look. If I select the planet, and I start investing in the scanning range, it should, I guess the default is I suppose if the default is 5, I don't really see much of a difference. Let's see if I add 1 scan range manually, if it updates differently. Okay. So I think it just has to do with the default value. Or like, more than that even, it's almost like it's only updating when it's an infrastructure value, more specifically. The UI anyway. So the UI, and that's basically, I guess, where I put this, wasn't it? I put this in with scanning range infrastructure. So very likely it's just gonna have to happen in here. And if I leave it here, it will do the calculation if the base value increases. So I guess it's still good to put it in this. Which means I'm gonna put basically the same thing down here. So the high value needs to be itself plus itself times the scanning frequency research. So high value gets set here, and then I have to do this math of the active scanning frequencies high value times, we're saying it's 100 float, divided by 100 float to a string for the text, and up here it's simply a math f dot round. We're just rounding it for simplicity's sake. And the idea is this adds the correct visual feedback without actually interfering with the infrastructure, the planet's actual base contribution. Or it's, yeah, the base contribution of the planet. Alright, so up here we're going to have to look at scanning range research. And it's basically the exact same code, actually. We're grabbing the slider. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, no, okay. Never mind. So it's basically just this for the scanning range. I think I can squeeze it all in here. Oh, this is a good point. So I only want to update this in the event there's a current active selection with scanning capacity. However, it still has the capacity to update. Wait, hold on. So let me see here. No, it doesn't matter. It's, well, if there's a selection and, well, it wouldn't be updating, then would it? It would just be the old value. So there has to be an active selection and there has to be an investment. And if that investment is scanning range research, trying to figure out a way to do this without just having to say if this for every single one. Although it is a particular case for this active selection scanner. So if there's a current active selection, you can only get here if there's an active investment and there's... Okay, so the easy... is going to run the slider update. Right here. If the current active selection actually has scanning range. Then it's fine to update the slider. And this value actually just comes from Alright, so this is going to be a little gross, but it's player data's current active selection. And we're getting the scanning range infrastructure from it, but we are getting the value from it. And I suppose to the same notion, it's basically the same thing down here then as well. We'll grab the slider, and we will run the slider update after this. If the player data has, only if the player data's current active selection has scanning frequency infrastructure. Oh, you know what? This may not run exactly correctly because there might not be an active selection. So I'll have to test it. I think I can just null guard it if necessary. So once again here, we're grabbing the player data and we're saying current active selection. We're getting the component, which is the scanning frequency infrastructure, and we're grabbing the value from that. And that's of course in the event current active selection is not null. If it is null, we're assume it should false out of there automatically. And okay, so let's give this a shot. Alright, so I can select it. And if I start investing in scanning range off the top, does it buff the scanning value? Okay, good. That's a little weird how it's ticking up like that. Now it's like smoothing out. That's very weird. And it's on camera too, so now everybody can see that it was weird. I'm not just saying that. But this is basically working. Yeah, so that's very strange that that's ticking like that. But it is basically working then. So if I go up here, and I can in fact have a scan that's just under the max. You know what? I just wondered if the cost of the scan. Oh wait, let me see. It looked like it went down. So if it goes from 4 to 5, I should in fact be able to. It didn't technically go down, so I think it's still working. Let's see if I can freak it out a little bit better. So the increased range should still decrease the, okay. It looks like it's working. It's still working in that regard. Alright, so we might as well see if the frequency value works. And if we add these in to the mix, try maxing them out. Alright, so I'd say that for the most part it's working just fine. This is still a balancing concern I've got. I don't know how to... the problem is it wastes all of the color range stuff I bothered to do by letting the frequency go that high, so I'd have to change it to where perhaps the frequency is scales differently. Maybe every 16 or 17 investments is like one color band or something like that. I'll consider that. If I select this, it did stick, but if I deselect, it cleared to 0. And if I select this, it doesn't have a capacity to change it, so I guess that basically is fine. Oh, actually, let me check. If I click this, I should have been investing still, which I think I was. And even updated. So I'm going to clear these investments and clear these investments. And the tick gets fixed, and then now I have a much larger scanning capacity going on here. So I'm rather sure there's something over here. Rather sure there's one like over here somewhere. And the idea in the long run would be to be able to claim these planets. And maybe get Cinema Machine involved so that I can do some better transpositioning of the camera. Which is just more of a player courtesy. And I'm gonna have to be able to make ships pretty soon. And send ships to planets. There is also a very silly point that's true, which is that a player could just come in here and permanent invest economy. And it's almost like makes economy investment irrelevant as a choice because it purely increases your economy. So then if you start to like bump other stuff up, it just doesn't matter. Oh, it does decrease the economy investment though, so you can't jank it up without okay. So you actually diminish the effect. Like for instance, adding the global value isn't even efficient compared to just taking it up by 1. There we go, add it. Which means that there's strategic times to use these. More or less. So at the beginning you might just sit here and only use base infrastructure additions. And you can only get so far with the scans. I still think it's cool how you can scan shit. Okay, you have to excuse me for thinking it's a little cool, but it's got some serious balancing implications to deal with. Alright, so I guess that's that for now. And it's actually working, so like I could probably run a clip of everything having an effect on the game space. And then in the next video, there's like options to increase the parallelism. But the main thing that has to happen is basically two things need to happen. The scanning or the spawning system needs to spawn a much higher diversity of things to scan, which yields the player needing to invest in more range and or more frequency. But that requires working on this random spawn system, which is a whole project on itself, in itself. Much less the what it's going to spawn, which is a separate project. So I've got to basically shift gears into doing something like that, which is a lot of design work, and it's going to be some code. So I'm going to have to get that done coming up in the next videos. But thank you for watching up to this point. I should have a good clip, a good cut of what the game is getting into at this point. So I really appreciate it if you've watched up to this point, and take care. I'll see you in the next one.